Hey, what's up, everybody? Chris here, and I want to pose a question. And I think the answer initially for a lot of people is very obvious, but I want to kind of talk through it and give you my thoughts on it because it's interesting, especially if you collect physical media like I do. And I focus mainly on Blu ray, sometimes 4K Blu ray, DVD, that sort of thing. Mostly because, with streaming, when you buy a movie on streaming, it does go away. And that's not to say that I don't ever buy movies on streaming. I do sometimes do that. What I prefer to do, however, if I can make it work, is get a physical copy of a movie that has a digital code with it, so that way I've got it on both. So if I'm traveling, it's easier with the digital version and all that. But I still very much am a believer that physical media offers the best picture, especially with Blu-ray and 4K Blu-ray. You don't have the artifacting, all of that kind of stuff. You get better audio with it. There's a whole slew of reasons for that. But I don't want to talk about Blu-ray or 4K Blu-ray today. I want to talk about VHS. Now, if you are close in age to me, I'm in my early 40s, you grew up with VHS, and it has been, or had been, past tense, many decades since I purchased a new VHS tape. But here we are, 2025, and recently in the mail from Witter Entertainment, I have received the first VHS tape that I've purchased in, again, I'm going to say 20 plus years, maybe 22, 23 years, something like that. I remember buying my first DVD toward the end of 2000 or mid 2000. It was The Matrix. I still have it. But here I am with my first VHS tape. This is the movie Scream. And so I think this is sort of notable because Damien Leone, who's famous for the Terrifier films, did the makeup on this, and it's got kind of that Terrifier feel. I watched this a week or two ago on my CRT television using, of course, a VCR to play it. And it really took me back. And here's what I'll preface all of this with saying is that over the past maybe 2 to 3 years, I have here and there purchased a few different VHS tapes to kind of build up my VHS collection. But I'm not the kind of person who's just buying VHS all over the place to just for the sake of having a big VHS library, right? I'm very methodical about VHS tapes specifically, especially. I mean, I am with Blu-ray and 4K Blu-ray also, but with VHS, I'm only going to watch it if it fits a very kind of narrow niche category. For me, 80s era horror and science fiction and that sort of stuff has a certain type of nostalgia and effect when you watch it on VHS, and especially with the CRT television. And I do want to pause and say, it is my opinion that VHS tapes look best on a CRT TV. I mean, that's what they're designed for. That's what VCRs were designed to work with. You can absolutely watch VHS tapes with a VCR on a modern 1080p or 4K LCD or LED TV. You can do it. I don't think it looks nearly as good, though. And I've seen it on both. I think if you're going to get into this hobby, or you have any interest in checking this out or revisiting this again, if you're my age, make an effort to find a CRT TV. I have a 13-inch Magnavox that actually has a DVD player built into it. I got it off of Facebook Marketplace maybe 2 to 3 years ago when I sort of thought about kind of getting back into this a little bit with certain titles, certain films. I found a VCR on eBay, which was packaged perfectly and shipped to me as a Sony. I haven't had any issues with it since I received it. But part of the reason I got back into this, because I had my VHS library from when I was a kid, just sort of sitting there, not being used at all, is my youngest child sort of saw these VHS tapes one day. He said, well, how do these actually work? What is this all about? And so that was sort of the impetus for me to go find a VCR, to get a CRT TV, to show him kind of what it was like when I was younger. And in revisiting some of those tapes, what I realized is that CRT does offer a certain picture and a certain quality that I had kind of forgotten about, right? When you go back and revisit it, there's a warmth to it. There's sort of a picture, I don't know, quality that you get that is just not possible on something like a modern 4K television. So with that in mind, I slowly started picking up some movies that I had never seen that I wanted to see that were from sort of the 80s and 90s, that sort of thing. A lot of things like really cheesy Van Damme action movies. I love that kind of stuff. Schwarzenegger action movies, Steven Seagal, even though his modern stuff is completely terrible. But that era sort of stuff I really enjoy. And again, 80s horror. I mean, we're thinking about things like Evil Dead, The Thing. Although I will say, I have The Thing on 4K, and if I'm going to pick between which of those two I'm going to watch the 4K version because it is immaculate. It looks amazing in 4K. But again, watching something on VHS gives you a certain experience that cannot be replicated, and it's really hard to describe, especially if you weren't alive during that time period and have never had that experience. But I started to discover as I researched VHS more and sort of modern VHS that there are companies out there putting out quote unquote new VHS tapes. Now, the reason I'm putting that in quotes is Nobody at this point, no major manufacturer, is actually making new VHS tapes themselves. So the only way that I imagine this is possible, and I'm going to take the actual cassette out so you can see it, is that they're buying blank tapes that are in stock somewhere, right? Either on eBay or in a warehouse, who knows where it is, putting these modern films in them or on these tapes and then sending them out. So you can see this is a Scotch EG Plus VHS tape. They put a modern label on it. They ship it out. But having watched Stream, this is a movie that was released in 2024 on my CRT television, of course, with my VCR. It really was kind of a nostalgic, fun experience. And it was interesting watching a modern movie like this. And it looked actually really clean and nice on the CRT. And it gives you that, again, that sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say warm fuzzies, but that experience that's really hard to duplicate or replicate. Now, when you start digging around online, again, what you start to see is that Woodard Entertainment, it's a great company. The struggle here is that it took a long time to get this. It is presented in a 4:3 full frame ratio, which is what I want if I'm going to watch something on VHS. But it takes a long time sometimes to get these in stock, to get them shipped out to customers. I mean, I think it took several months for me to receive this in the mail. It was worth the wait, but, if you're someone who's impatient, that's something to consider. But what you start to see is that there are a lot of companies doing this. I can think of a company called Death by VHS. They have some of the best looking cover art for VHS tapes that I've ever seen. I mean, very reminiscent of sort of that 80s era feel. And again, if you're my age, you can remember going to a video store. For me in my hometown, it was a store called K&L Video, long since closed, obviously, in the age of streaming and Redbox, which is now not a thing anymore also. But I can just remember being a kid, browsing the aisles, seeing those horror films with those really kind of creative, outlandish covers and wanting to see them. Things like House, if you remember that movie, it's got like a hand that's been severed holding a key, stuff like that. Ghoulies, I mean, these sort of horror movies with just ridiculous covers and awesome taglines on the front. That's the kind of thing that I love to see on VHS. But there are modern companies putting out new movies on VHS. Late Night with the Devil, Cuckoo. I mean, if you go and look at, again, Woodard Entertainment, Death by VHS, Lunch Meat VHS, you can go out and get new movies on VHS. I will say that generally speaking, I don't fully understand the point of a new film being on VHS unless it fits that very certain niche that I'm thinking about. Again, a movie like Stream, which is kind of in the vein of Terrifier, is like that, right? Speaking of the Terrifier films, and even more recently, Alien Romulus, a new big budget 20th Century Fox movie, have been released on VHS because of that sort of nostalgic uptick where people are getting a little bit more interested in this as a format. I will add to that the question posed by the title of this video, is VHS making a comeback? The answer is no. I mean, it is a dead format. As I mentioned moments ago, people are not making new VHS tapes, blank tapes with which to put movies on. They aren't being currently manufactured. There's a limited supply of those, a certain stock that will eventually be used up. I don't know what will happen for VHS enthusiasts at that point, but that's sort of where we're at. But there is a growing niche market for this sort of thing, and I'm part of that, right? I recently ordered a copy of The Void. I'm waiting for it to get here on VHS, a movie that I have seen, in high definition streaming before, that I thought was really, really great. It was a great movie, sort of a abstract, I don't want to say Geiger-esque, that's not the word I'm looking for, but sort of this otherworldly type of experience. But I knew the moment I saw it that it kind of would be something suited for that VHS aesthetic. And so I can't wait to see what that looks like on VHS, because I think it will add a certain level or a certain layer to that experience that doesn't currently exist while watching it in sort of an HD format. But there is sort of a niche market out there that continues to grow, and I think it's really interesting. I think if you're interested in VHS and you want to check it out, go to places like Facebook Marketplace, go to Mercari, go to eBay, wherever it may be. But my argument would be, make an effort to get a CRT TV. I just don't think VHS looks nearly as clean and doesn't give you the same effect as watching it on a more modern television. You can get CRTs for not that much, even though I will say, due to the uprise in sort of retro gaming, that kind of stuff, CRTs are becoming harder to find. And again, nobody's making new CRTs, so once the CRT dies, that's going to be it for it. So it becomes an increasingly large challenge to find ones that are high quality and working. I mean, the one I've got, the 13-inch Magnavox CRT that I'm looking at right now, which does have the built-in DVD player, and I do use the DVD player on that if I'm watching a full-frame DVD. If I'm watching a widescreen DVD, I have another television that I think is better suited for that. I don't like widescreen content on a CRT because it's designed by 4:3 aspect ratios. But anyway, make an effort to get a CRT. It doesn't have to be the best one in the world, but just make sure the picture is clear, make sure it's not damaged and that it's operating properly. This is the one I have is on the newer end of CRTs, which again probably stopped being manufactured, 2007, 6, somewhere in that range. So I'm hoping that I can get a certain amount of longevity out of this. But as someone who grew up during the VHS era, it's kind of awesome to see movies with that aesthetic still being produced, modern movies that would be served well to have that aesthetic being produced. And I enjoy collecting these. So I'm slowly kind of getting my library built up of those. And when I see an older VHS tape that I want, something like Critters, right, that was released when I was a kid, that I think gives you, again, that same experience that you can't really get with a modern display, I will go after that. But in my opinion, it's not really worth getting everything under the sun on VHS because they don't all offer the same thing. But it just depends on what you're interested in. For me, again, it's 80s era and maybe early 90s era action, sci-fi, horror type of stuff. But beyond that, I don't really think it's worth the effort. So I just wanted to talk about this a little bit because the more I see these companies out there putting new films on VHS, I think it's kind of interesting. And it's cool to see the format finding some kind of a new life. It is not back, I would say, in the same way that vinyl is. I don't think it's going to make that kind of resurgence because the technology is basically dead and not being manufactured. Again, no new VCRs are being made, no new CRTs are being made, and no new blank VHS tapes are being made. And that makes it really hard for it to be something that has a full sort of rise. I keep looking to see, though, on something like Kickstarter, is anybody out there going to make an effort to try and revive CRTs? I don't think so because of the manufacturing processes involved. But anyway, I wanted to just talk about VHS for a minute because, again, my first piece of physical media was on VHS, and I still own it. It's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. I received it when I was 5 years old in kindergarten. That would have been 1987. Still have it, lost the box years ago, but the VHS still works. I think it's a little warped, a little distorted at this point, but it kicked off my physical media love when I was that young. Again, 5 years old. So anyway, what do you think about this modern kind of revival of VHS? I wouldn't say that it's back. It's still a dead format, to be perfectly honest. And I think it's got a very niche type of audience, and you have to have a certain type of sensibility to appreciate it. But what do you think about its revival? Do you look for new movies on VHS like this? You know, something like The Void. Also, another one that I've got coming in the not too distant future is Late Night with the Devil on VHS, which I think is one that would also be served by that sort of aesthetic. But what do you think about it? Do you think it's worth the effort? Do you think it's not worth the effort? Do you collect VHS? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, thanks so much for watching.